Hello, my name is Joshua, and I'd like to talk about something again that's controversial in this video. And so, the topic of this video is going to be on punishment or systems of punishment. The first thing I would like to say is that this is not Foucault's ideas. I am reading Foucault, but what I've read so far from Foucault is the history of the institution of sex, and I'm currently on his small book about madness, and next I'll be getting into his larger book on the history of madness. But I haven't gotten to punishment yet. So this is not Foucault's ideas, though it does take a genealogical vantage point, because as a thinker I am influenced a lot by Friedrich Nietzsche and Ludwig Feuerbach, and so they were a genealogist in their um, uh, philosophical analysis, and so that's rubbed off on me, and so it will definitely be genealogical. Now, what do I think punishment is? I think punishment is many things. So um, there is really so many ways in which people think about punishment as so there's punishment in the broader sense, and then there's punishment in the personal sense. But I tend to think from my genealogical lens that most things start on a personal level and then they spread to a broader level. In terms of human evolution, not in terms of modern contemporary affairs. So I don't think that the things that are most common um, with us are things that just now appeared and here they are in all of their glory. I think that they've had many iterations and evolutions over time in order for them to be what they are right now and right here, which is why I like the genealogical method of analysis and trying to understand the metaphysics or the psychodynamics of human affairs and institutions. When you're talking about things about the world, or when you're talking about things about human beings and other animals, then I don't think genealogical method is effective. But when you're talking about things that human beings have, like institutions, things that aren't real, things that are a product of abstraction or whatever. So things that you would say that they're like the state to me is not real. It's not real from the standpoint of it's not any part, you can't point to something. It's an abstraction. It is real from the standpoint of a broader relational narrative of social and historical dynamics. So you'll find out how real estate is if you decide not to pay your taxes. So I'm not using real in that sense, but I mean real as in something you can grab a hold of to understand what it actually is or how it operates in the world. That's what I mean by real. Not maybe like what's the effective truth of it or what's the empirical truth of it. You can't get an effective truth out of thinking about the state as a actual thing. So what I mean is, if you think about the state as an actual thing, then you're probably either a statist or an anarchist. So I think that I'm not really interested in an ideological discussion. What I'm interested in is knowing why something is the way it fucking looks, and that's all that I care about. Because it is annoying to interact with, but if I know why something is, then I tend to either know how to get rid of it or tend to know how to get around it, or I tend to know, or I tend to am better able to appreciate it and suffer it more, I guess, resolutely than not. And so a genealogical method for understanding systems of punishment. And I mean, I know that systems of punishment differ within various countries and states and across time and history. I don't care about any of those specific cases. What I care about is what actually motivates punishment or the system of punishment to emerge from the psychology of human beings. And so that's what I want to talk about. That's what I wanted to talk about because I think it's important in understanding our nature as social animals. So people tend to think sociality is something of a well, I don't know if people tend to think. So I put it like this: when you say social to people, in modernity, they think, oh, social media, oh, or going to parties or talking to people or being friends or extroverts or something like that. Sociality is a lot more complicated than that, and it's a lot more dangerous than that. I think everybody is familiar with the idea of group thinking, but I don't know if everybody is as comfortable with thinking of social spaces as human policing, and that this is a normative feature or a something that's going to happen almost no matter what. Whenever you put people together, they are going to have a metrics of things which they wish to police, and they're going to have a metrics of things which they wish to reward, because human beings are not individualistic. So you may be thinking, Joshua, why would you say how would you say that individualism in this modern world is a result of very specific features of modernity, in the sense that you can own private property, in the sense that there is at least I think that this is why individualism seems like a believable thing. Individualism is a myth, but I'm not exactly against myths either. And that's one of the things. So, I mean, I don't know exactly how I'm going to talk about things in this video, but there's a lot of things that I think people assume about me because I'm an atheist, or people would call me an atheist, that I'm not exactly an atheist in the strict sense of the word. So, like, I definitely don't like the myth of Christianity, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that I don't dislike that I dislike all myth or something like that. I'm a writer, so like I can't be I'm a writer, and I actually like philosophy. So scientific I like science, don't get me wrong, I'm trained as a scientist. But the scientific worldview never dispelled my interest in philosophy and literature and fiction and fantasy and things like that. And I like Carl Jung. I don't agree with him. I definitely don't agree with Jordan B. Peterson's ideas. I think Jordan B. Peterson as a psychologist is great. I think Jordan B. Peterson as a philosopher, we're gonna fight. But I mean, so I'm not exactly a rationalist. So that's what I don't want people to think about me. I'm not a rationalist, and I do practice rationality from the standpoint that I'm very rigorous in my thinking, and I know to criticize my thoughts and things like that, and that I can be wrong, but I'm not a rationalist. I don't believe human beings are rational fundamentally. I think human beings have rationality, or they have rationale, but I think rationale is a result of things rather than being something fundamental in and of itself. So I'd put it like that. Anyways, and so when it comes to people, I think that individualism, for example, is a result of modern phenomena in education. So, what I say human beings are is the non-disinterested is not human beings are not I just say they're not a disinterested animal, meaning that human beings are predicated on an interest. They're always interested in something. They're never not interested. So they're never not interested. And so people may say, well, Joshua, people fantasize and they daydream and they rest and things like that. Yes, there's features of our physiology, and there are like empirical states that can be met in the world, such that our prefrontal cortex doesn't want to be fully engaged in the now. But that's just because it's storing its energy and it's looking around in the environment or within your memory to find something new to be interested in. Unless you're depressed or something like that. There are a number of personality and emotional I'm gonna call them disorders. That's just because that's what psychology calls them. It's just a random crapshoot, man. In my term, in terms of my thinking, like I just overthrow so many mainstream things. I'm not saying that I don't agree with mainstream ideas to a certain extent, but in my speech and in my thinking, it's just like mainstream doesn't live here. And so I will say that I do think that if you have personality and emotional disorders, that you will not exactly always have your mind operating like that. It's not a given. But generally, that's going to be the case with all people. And since that's the case, I think that human beings are not disinterested animals. Human beings are just waiting for something to be interested. Human beings are preparing to be interested in something. Human beings are not disinterested animals. That's not what they are. And so human beings are also social animals. It's why we're nosy or busybodies or into what other people are doing. Now, it's definitely the case that temperamental variances make for people's proclivity or interest in doing X, Y, and Z, but we have ears and we probably have ears and speech just to project whatever it is that we're currently feeling. So, and why is that important? Because emotions are sticky. So, emotions don't actually just animate ourselves, they also animate the group and group dynamics. And so people, if they've been to rock concerts or churches or are in church or have seen protests or been a part of a protest or anything like that, or a mob or anything like that, emotional contagion is a real thing because human beings are not disinterested animals, and they're also socially policing. And I use socially policing because it's true that people want to make sure that we all think and feel similarly to some degree because we're pragmatic in our nature or based in utility, because it's why actual resting, and I don't mean so, okay, so this is why religious traditions are very, very fascinating to me because I think religious traditions actually recognize that people don't really rest. So, what is rest per se? Like, well, or at least they're trying to discover it. They intuitively, they're trying to discover what it means to rest. It's why God rests. Because what's true about human beings is, to me, from my vantage point, what I've sussed so far, is that there are many different competing emotions at bottom that are motivating us to be and do things. They don't necessarily script our behavior. Our behavior is something that's learned with a certain evaluative bias or framework that's made way of by our emotions and drives. But it's the case that nonetheless, behavior is learned, and so you have it the case that people, in terms of their, how would I put it? So, okay, so behavior is learned. So, what so I don't pay attention to it as much. So I guess that's what I'm trying to I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So because I think whenever I talk about these things, people want to look for behaviors in their personal life or the manifestation of these things in their own personal reverie of experience. And so the way I want to frame this is to put it like this: your biology is always constantly functioning unless you're dead, and it has various different levels of activity or latent activity, because I don't want to say inactivity. The thing is always operational, working, moving, thriving, doing whatever it does. It's self consistent always. It's not necessarily it's existing in a self-consistent sort of organizational scheme always. It's not necessarily the case that there's a such thing as well, nobody's talking about energy, so I'm not going to make this a discussion of physics. This is more like a philosophical conversation, though there are material things to consider. This is completely a philosophical conversation, so this is not something to be applicable. This is not something to help you out personally, unless you tend to notice certain patterns with yourself or people around you. So I'd put it like this: the because I'm trying to talk about punishment, but it's a genealogical thing. It literally comes from what we are as animals. So that's what I think. And so whenever you're looking at human beings, we're not disinterested. So we always have a reason or an incentive to be preparing for the next thing or looking for the next thing in the world, because that's really what it means for us to be an animal. Now, religions are very interesting because they recognize this tendency in human beings. It's why in the Bible it says all is vanity. It's why Buddhists believe striving is vain. It's why there are certain, in almost all traditions, our actions or what we do actively in the world is not at all a description of the ultimate reality. I wouldn't say that. It's the only thing that I would say that it makes the reality that we're actually inhabiting, because we only inhabit a social space ever as human beings. We don't inhabit any other space. So, like, the material world is actually a part of spaces that we inhabit, but look, I'm sitting in a house. I'm not sitting in the middle of the Kundalini Desert or something like that. And so, and even if you're sitting in the middle of the Mojave Desert, it's the case that there are various artifacts of culture around you sustaining your existence. You're never in a completely, unless you actually go trekking in the mountains and things like that. It's why creative people go out into wilderness and things like that, because that's where you get away from social spaces. It helps you get a real understanding or grasp of what you've been experiencing, because it's the only time you're not actually experiencing the influences of other people indirectly or directly, because human beings are not disinterested. So they're always watching and listening to one another, because whatever is good for one person may be good for another, and we're always socially competing for some spot or motion of progress or acquisition. So people are not interested in allowing one another to run free, because allowing ourselves to just do and run buckshot, there are some practical reasons as to why this is the case. So and then there is just that human beings are self-interested, and so self-interest is not exactly something that is good or evil. I'd put it like this: if you think that we police and watch ourselves and things like that just because we have good in mind, that's not the truth. And it's not the case that people don't try to borrow a colloquial term, hold one another back. We do, because we're afraid of one another, and we're afraid of the consequences of our actions in the world. Rightly so, because our brain is set up for dynamics that are long gone in terms of our behaviors, and in terms of in which the ways in which we can allow our emotions and drives to script our behaviors. So in modernity, we are mostly cognitive creatures, or at least we try to put most of the weight of our interaction in the world on the fact that we're cognitive animals. Human beings are not rational, and so that's something that's important in terms of understanding human behavior, because that means sorry 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 that means that I'd put it like this. The reason I laugh is because it's actually a very uncomfortable truth. So That means that um, uh, whenever people are doing X, Y, or Z with one another, there's always some sort of motivation or impulse or something at bottom. It's what uh, the School of Psychoanalysis was trying to hone in on, because it really is important in understanding, why the hell are things so damn funny, and why are they inefficient, or why does the world look like this? Why is there such a disconnect between myself and the world and the way in which it seems it operates and things like that? Like, what the hell is actually going on with culture? So the what I think is, as far as like what I've like been looking at and studying, is human beings are fundamentally irrational. And so because human beings are fundamentally irrational, they do have a certain desire or need to discharge their emotional constitution. And this is where the will to power is about. The will to power, though, God, you gotta love Christians for trying to make it about something else. The will to power is not about power in the sense of, militant or martial force. It's about the fact that underneath this kind of uh, rational cognitive complex is a real animating sort of uh, reverie of images, patterns, the emotions, whatever you want to call them, like animating agents. That's the way that I'd phrase it, that makes human beings interested in one another and interested in what one another does. And so that's what it ultimately, and that's because we're social. And so we're socially policing because we want to make sure what our neighbor is doing is in accordance with our good and in accordance with. So I would say our good and our pragmatic inclinations, because I don't think pragmatism means good. I mean, I think pragmatism means convenience. I think bureaucracy comes from pragmatic convenience, and punishment comes from our good, because our good, and when I say our, I mean the individual or the collection or the collusion of individuals, because we tend to think about the greater good and things like that from, I don't know, like a more um, uh, cognitive standpoint. Honestly, from a purely like genealogical standpoint, you have to understand human beings came together in families, in groups, and those groups settled in areas and established things. Even in hunter-gatherer tribes are a lot more like chimpanzees, in the sense that if you have them in one group, they're all pretty closely or somewhat, but more related to one another than maybe you are to your neighbor, unless you live next to your family. And it's why families tend to move into spaces and things like that together, because there's a sort of social um, animating force in us that's not innocuous. So I put it like that. So that's what's scripting our social interest. And so I think punishment is a result of revenge. So um, uh, I really think it's a result of revenge. I think the reason why people like punishment, or the idea of punishment, is because people like the idea of revenge. And I think that that's where the word evil comes from, because evil is something that ought to be eradicated or gotten rid of. And I think that that's why people consider suffering evil, or project evil onto suffering or something like that. One, I tell you, suffering is not evil. I don't think that. I think also, well, and I think there's a reason for it, because we're all social. So maybe once upon a time, the reason why people suffered is because they were being harangued by certain people and certain groups over their lifetime. And so suffering is something of a category that we use for group dynamics, or what groups are doing to one another, per se, or what groups make us feel about ourselves. But suffering is not something explicitly feature of emotions, and it's not explicitly a feature of the world. I don't think that. I don't think that. And I think that uh, because it's possibly like that in terms of the roots. I don't mean in terms of the what you literally see now, but where does it come from? Why are we like this? Genealogy. So that's what I'm after, because I just want to understand what it means to be human. um, and so um, the okay, and so yeah, and so it's anyways, and so because we're in something of a dramatization or a collusive narrative, like Romeo and Juliet. It's why I like plays and literature a lot more than I like science's understanding of human psychology or a description of what it means to be human. Like, I'm not a fan because I don't think it can actually get there, because well, you need evidence in science, and I think the only evidence is in our damn motivation and the way in which we choose to represent things in the world and the words we tend to use and various things like that. I mean, I think almost everything I think would not be able to be taken seriously under a real scientific lens. It's not something that you're going to be able to measure, which is why I'm just saying I'm putting out ideas. I'm not talking about truth per se. I think it is a part of the truth, but I don't really know to what degree and to what extent. But I think in terms of and these are all my ideas. Okay, I just want to put that out there. I think that so you're not going to find this written in a book. I mean, the closest philosopher you're going to come to hearing say things like this is Ludwig Feuerbach, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and Friedrich Nietzsche, 100%. And so I just think I'm following behind a certain tradition, and Michel Foucault, which is why even though Foucault's a postmodernist, I don't dislike him as much as I don't dislike postmodernists necessarily, but I just think that they don't get everything right. So, anyways, I'm okay. Anyways, moving on. So, rewinding my thought. Okay, so I think that and so I'm also just like spilling like what I think, because I've been doing that a lot lately. I've had a lot of these ideas for a long time, but they're so damn like controversial. Like, I have no, other than just purely logically arguing things and pointing to instances and inferences and things like that, there is no damn data for any of this stuff, and so I don't talk about it. But I mean, I don't talk about it, but I think back to punishment. So I think punishment, because I think we want to get back at those who oppressed us or wronged us. I think that that's why social justice seems so palatable to the emotions of many people, though it makes no goddamn sense whatsoever. It's why it's extraordinarily compelling, because I don't think so. I tend to think like Carl Jung, people don't have ideas, ideas have people, but I think it's worse than that. Emotions graph onto certain things. So your emotions inspire you to believe certain things. They don't it's not, you're not a free agent. I just put it like, you're not a free agent. No person is a free agent as far as I can tell. You just have emotions and behavior, or emotions and developmental situations. So what you're able to experience over time and what you actively experience in yourself and view in other people and things like that in the world, that's all that's going on with the human animal in terms of behavior in learning. So in terms of behavior, as far as I think, and so it's probably not the case that people really have ideas in the strict sense of how we currently think about people having ideas. It's the case that people graph on to certain narratives because they're emotionally compelling. That's why news is problematic. It's why it's hard to get the truth about anything, because nobody's really interested in the facts. And even people who are interested in the facts, they're not interested in the facts for the sake of the facts or the sake of anything. That just doesn't seem to be like, the human beings aren't disinterested animals Well, they have a certain set of drives and emotions and instincts that are compelling them to move towards certain directions and believe certain things because there's a social biological history to all of us that we are fit to serve to some extent. It's why I want to believe in free will. So for example, I think I believe in free will because I'm American. Even if it's the case that life is only 10% free or 15% free, I still only pay attention to that 10 or 15% because, well, I'm American. And so I think that that's true. So I'm not saying I'm against myth or something like that, but I think in terms of punishment, it is just a competition between narratives and people groups. That's it. And so that to me is neither good or evil, but natural whatever. And if we want to get a handle on it, we have to realize that there's no real basis for it other than people's interest in revenge and their interest in promoting a certain set of narratives over others because it emotionally appeals to them or is more convenient to them. And that may sound like a completely materialistic take or something like that. It's not materialism because I don't know if you can actually put your finger on it or measure it or something like that. I don't know if it's actually like that. I don't know if it's spirits or whatever, whatever, whatever. I don't think that those things are real per se. I think that those are narratives too. I think that things are meaningful, but I think what's meaningful and what's really going on, which is why I think text has meaning and things like that. I don't agree with the postmodernists that it's just all power struggles or something like that. I don't think that, even though I'm talking about a competition between narratives and revenge. I don't think revenge is a result of, so you can say it's social power or something like that. I suppose you could put it like that. Suppose you can phrase it like that. So you could call it that, but I don't think it's that black and white. So that's the way that I'd put it. I don't think it's that black and white. I think you have a very sophisticated network of social dynamics that have strewn themselves across time that um, it's going to be really hard to get down to the bottom of any of it. But the most genealogical view is, to me, is that punishment and systems of punishment have come about because of systems of revenge and